After a terrible accident, a man in his 60s lost his memory and the ability to walk. Crushed by despair, he pushed everyone away and told every nurse to leave. But one black nurse refused. She stayed, night after night, enduring his anger and guiding him through hopelessness, never knowing her sacrifice would be repaid in a way she could never have imagined. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The emergency department at St. Augustine Memorial Hospital smelled of antiseptic and desperation at 3 in the morning. Naomi Carter pushed through the double doors, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as she hurried toward the nurse's station. She was already 20 minutes late for her shift, having waited 45 minutes for the bus that should have taken 15. At 29, Naomi carried herself with the controlled exhaustion of someone who had learned early that life demanded more strength than most people possessed. Her scrubs were clean but faded from countless washings, the fabric thin enough to show the outline of the cheap undershirt beneath. She'd bought these scrubs 2 years ago with overtime money, and they would have to last until she could afford new ones. "Carter, you're late," Sandra Morrison snapped from behind the desk. The night supervisor was a thin woman with steel gray hair and the kind of permanent scowl that came from 20 years of understaffed shifts. "Room 214 just came up from emergency. Motor vehicle accident, no ID, critical but stable. He's yours." She paused, lowering her voice with a warning look. "Fair warning, he's been difficult. Day shift couldn't handle him. Refuses meds, threw a food tray at Janet, and told Dr. Peterson to go to hell. 3 nurses have requested transfers away from his room. If you can't handle him either, we'll have to consider other options." The implication hung in the air. Other options meant the psychiatric hold ward, where difficult patients were sedated into compliance. The walk to room 214 felt longer than usual, her body protesting after only 4 hours of sleep. She'd been working double shifts 3 days a week for the past 6 months, desperate to keep up with the bills that seemed to multiply on her kitchen table. Rent was due in 5 days, and she was still $300 short. Maya's textbooks for the spring semester had cost more than expected, and the electric bill had arrived with a late fee that made her stomach clench. But that wasn't the worst of it. Maya had called yesterday, her voice tight with worry. The university had made a mistake with her financial aid package. She was short $4,000 for the semester. Without it, she'd have to take a year off school, losing her lab position and likely her spot in the pre-med program. "I can work more hours at the coffee shop," Maya had said, but they both knew it wouldn't be enough. The man in room 214 appeared to be in his mid-60s, silver-haired and conscious now, connected to machines that monitored his vital signs. His chart told a story she'd seen too many times: high-speed collision, massive trauma, spinal injury with uncertain prognosis. The most devastating note was at the bottom: possible permanent paralysis below the waist. Patient has been informed. His clothes, what remained of them, were ordinary khakis and a polo shirt that could have come from any department store. The only identification was a battered leather wallet containing $23 and a driver's license so damaged that only the name Richard was still legible. As Naomi approached his bed, Richard's pale blue eyes fixed on her with undisguised hostility. "Another one," he said bitterly. "Let me guess, you're here to tell me about the power of positive thinking. Or maybe you want to show me some inspiring videos of wheelchair athletes." "I'm Naomi," she said calmly, checking his chart. "I'll be taking care of you tonight. How's your pain level?" "Pain?" Richard's laugh was harsh. "I can't feel anything below my waist, my brain feels like it's wrapped in cotton, and I can't remember my own last name. But sure, let's talk about pain management." Before Naomi could respond, Richard's arm swept across his bedside table, sending the water pitcher and plastic cup crashing to the floor. Water splashed across her shoes. "Oops," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "Better call housekeeping." Naomi knelt to pick up the pieces of broken plastic, checking to make sure none had cut her hands. As she stood, Richard was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Why aren't you leaving?" he asked. "Everyone else does." "Because someone needs to clean this up," she replied, matter-of-factly. "And because you're scared." Richard's eyes flashed with anger. "I'm not scared. I'm realistic. There's a difference." Over the next 3 days, Richard's reputation as the most difficult patient on the floor became legendary. He refused physical therapy, knocked medication cups out of nurses' hands, and had screaming matches with anyone who tried to encourage optimism about his condition. The day shift nurses had started drawing straws to see who would have to deal with him. But Naomi found herself staying later each evening, often missing the bus that would get her home at a reasonable hour. On Wednesday, she missed the last bus entirely and had to walk 3 miles in the rain, arriving home soaked and shivering at 2 a.m. "Naomi," Maya said when she called Thursday morning, worry evident in her voice, "you sound terrible. Are you getting any sleep?" "I'm fine," Naomi lied, looking at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles under her eyes, skin pale with exhaustion. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. "The patient I told you about, he's challenging, but I think he's close to a breakthrough. Maybe you should let someone else handle it." Maya suggested gently. "You can't save everyone." But Naomi had made a promise to their mother 8 years ago, sitting beside another hospital bed. "Take care of people now. Don't ever leave someone alone when they're hurting most." That evening, she found Richard staring at the ceiling, his hands clenched into fists on the hospital blanket. When she knocked softly on the doorframe, he didn't acknowledge her presence. "Rough day?" she asked, settling into the chair beside his bed, despite his obvious desire to be left alone. "Every day is rough when you can't feel your legs," Richard said without looking at her. "Every day is rough when your brain feels like scrambled eggs." "Tell me about before the accident," Naomi suggested. "Sometimes talking about fragments helps the bigger pieces fall into place." "What's the point?" Richard's voice was flat. "Even if I remember who I was, it won't change what I am now." "And what are you now?" Richard finally turned to look at her, his eyes holding a pain that went deeper than physical injury. "Broken, useless, a burden that everyone has to pretend to care about, because it's their job." The words hit Naomi harder than she expected. "Is that what you think I'm doing, pretending? Aren't you?" Richard's voice was cruel now, deliberately hurtful. "You sit here night after night, missing your own life, because some supervisor told you to keep the difficult patient quiet. You think I don't see how tired you are, how much this is costing you." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You want to know what I remember? I remember the sound of metal twisting. I remember thinking, just before everything went black, that maybe it would be better if I didn't wake up. And you know what, maybe I was right." Naomi felt tears prick her eyes, but kept her voice steady. "You don't mean that." "Don't I?" Richard's laugh was bitter. "Look at me. Look at what caring for me is doing to you. You're killing yourself for someone who's already dead inside." That night, Naomi sat in her car in the hospital parking lot and cried for 20 minutes. Her hands shook as she tried to count the money in her wallet, not enough for Maya's tuition gap, barely enough for next week's groceries. Her body ached from exhaustion, and Richard's words echoed in her mind. Maybe he was right, maybe she was killing herself for nothing. When she finally drove home, she found Maya waiting up despite the late hour. "The university called," Maya said quietly. "They need an answer about the tuition by Friday, or I lose my spot." Naomi closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every promise she'd ever made. To their mother, to Maya, to herself. "I'll figure something out, Naomi." Maya's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't keep doing this. You're working yourself to death for everyone except yourself. When was the last time you ate a real meal? When was the last time you slept 8 hours?" "I'm fine," Naomi said automatically. "No, you're not." Maya sat down beside her sister on the worn couch. "And I'm scared that one of these days, you're going to collapse from trying to save everyone else." On Friday morning, Sandra Morrison called Naomi into her office. The supervisor's expression was grimmer than usual. "Carter, we need to talk about your performance lately." Naomi felt ice in her stomach. "What about it?" "You've been spending excessive time with the patient in 214. You've missed 2 mandatory staff meetings. You've been late to your other assignments, and yesterday Dr. Chen found you in that room at midnight, off the clock. He needed professional medical care, not a personal cheerleader," Sandra interrupted. "I've received complaints that you're showing favoritism, neglecting other patients, and violating protocol by providing unauthorized therapy sessions." Sandra opened a file on her desk. "I'm issuing a formal written warning. Any more infractions related to over-involvement with patients, and you'll be terminated. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am. Good. Now Dr. Peterson wants to transfer the patient in 214 to the psychiatric unit. He's been violent, non-compliant, and is disrupting the entire ward. Unless his behavior changes dramatically by Monday, he'll be moved to psychiatric hold with chemical restraints. That afternoon, Naomi had an interview scheduled for a nursing position at Children's Hospital, better hours, better pay, a chance to finally get ahead financially. She'd been preparing for weeks, had bought a new blouse with money she couldn't spare. Instead, she called in sick and spent her afternoon at St. Augustine Memorial, sitting beside Richard's bed while he slept fitfully, his face creased with pain even in unconsciousness. When he woke that evening, his eyes found hers immediately. "You're here again," he said, but the hostility was gone. Instead, he sounded tired, defeated. "They want to transfer you to psychiatric hold," Naomi said without preamble. "Chemical restraints, isolation, no visitors." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe that's what I deserve, is it?" Naomi leaned forward in her chair. "Is that what you remember wanting, to be drugged into submission in a locked room?" "I don't remember wanting anything," Richard said. "That's the problem." "Then let me tell you what I remember wanting," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that made her bones ache. "I remember wanting to be a teacher when I was young. I remember wanting to travel, to see the ocean, to fall in love and have a family of my own." She paused, gathering her courage. "I remember wanting all those things, and giving them up one by one to take care of other people. My mother first, then my sister, then patients like you who need someone to believe they're worth saving." Richard's eyes were fixed on her face now, something shifting behind them. "I missed a job interview today," Naomi continued. "A good job, one that could have changed everything for me. I missed it because I was sitting here, watching you sleep, wondering if maybe this time when you woke up, you'd be ready to try." "Why?" Richard's voice was barely audible. "Why would you do that?" "Because 8 years ago my mother made me promise something," Naomi said. "She made me promise never to leave someone alone when they're hurting most. And right now, you're hurting more than anyone I've ever met." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook, her own journal, pages filled with her handwriting. "Want to know what else I remember? I remember writing this after my first night shift here." She opened the notebook and read aloud. "Met a patient today who's lost everything. His mobility, his memory, his hope. He's angry and difficult and mean to everyone who tries to help. But underneath all that anger, he's terrified. And I think maybe the reason he pushes everyone away is because he's never had someone who wouldn't leave, no matter how hard he pushed." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "You wrote that about me." "I wrote that about the man I saw underneath all the pain," Naomi said. "The man who's still in there, fighting to survive." She closed the notebook and looked directly at him. "But I can't keep fighting for both of us. I've given up my job prospects, my health, my sister's tuition money, all because I believe that man is worth saving. But unless he starts believing it too, I'm going to lose everything I've sacrificed, and it won't matter." Richard was quiet for a long time, tears streaming down his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, more vulnerable than she'd ever heard it. "What if I try and fail? What if I can never walk again?" "Then we figure out who you are without walking," Naomi replied. "But what if you don't try, and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been possible?" The breakthrough came the next morning. Naomi arrived for her shift to find Richard sitting up in bed, his breakfast tray, untouched but not thrown across the room. "I want to try," he said as soon as he saw her. "I want to try to stand up." What followed was the most difficult 20 minutes of physical effort Naomi had ever witnessed. Richard's face contorted with concentration as he tried to will sensation back into his lower body. His arms shook as he attempted to support his weight, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort. For 15 minutes, nothing happened. Richard's legs remained unresponsive, his face growing more discouraged with each failed attempt. "I can't do it," he gasped, starting to sink back toward the bed. "Wait," Naomi said firmly, moving to support him. "One more try. One more." Richard looked at her, seeing the exhaustion in her face, the weight she'd lost, the sacrifice she'd made. You've given up everything for this moment, he said quietly. We've both given up everything for this moment, she replied. Don't waste it. Richard closed his eyes, drew a deep breath, and tried again. This time, his right foot twitched, then his left, and then with Naomi supporting him, he stood for 20 seconds. I felt them, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. I felt my legs. It was while Richard was working with the physical therapist 2 weeks later that his memories began returning. The breakthrough came during a walking exercise. He'd progressed from wheelchair to walker to taking tentative steps unassisted. Montgomery, he said suddenly, gripping the parallel bars with white knuckles. My name is Richard Montgomery. The name brought with it a flood of memories, board meetings and construction sites, luxury cars and expensive restaurants, a lifestyle that suddenly felt foreign and uncomfortable. That evening, when Naomi stopped by after her shift, she found Richard staring out the window with an expression she couldn't read. I remember who I am, he said without turning around, and I'm not sure you're going to like it. Tell me, Naomi said, settling into the familiar chair beside his bed. Richard was quiet for a long moment. I'm wealthy, very wealthy, construction, real estate, investments. I could have funded your sister's entire education with what I spend on lunch meetings. The admission hit Naomi like a physical blow. How wealthy? Wealthy enough that you would never have needed to miss that job interview, Richard said, finally turning to meet her eyes. Wealthy enough that I should have told you weeks ago, but I was afraid you'd treat me differently. Naomi felt the room spin slightly. All those nights she'd stayed late, all the sacrifices she'd made, while he had the resources to solve her problems with a phone call. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice carefully controlled. Because for the first time in my life, someone cared about me for who I was, not what I could provide, Richard said. Every relationship I've ever had was transactional. People were nice to Richard Montgomery the millionaire, not to Richard the broken man in a hospital bed. But I was destroying my life to help you, Naomi said, anger finally creeping into her voice. I gave up everything, and you watched me do it. I know, Richard said, his voice breaking, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I need you to know, the man who learned to stand again, who learned to hope again, that was only possible because you saw something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. The conversation that followed was painful and necessary. Richard explained that his returned memories included not just wealth but profound loneliness, years of relationships based on financial advantage rather than genuine connection. I should have told you as soon as I remembered, he said, but I was terrified that you'd stop seeing me as a person and start seeing me as a problem to solve with money. Naomi listened, her emotions cycling between anger, hurt, and something that felt like grief. I need time, she said finally. Time to figure out what this all means. The next morning brought Maya to the hospital, her face worried as she searched for room 214. When she finally found it, she discovered Richard working through physical therapy exercises in the hallway, using parallel bars to support increasingly confident steps. You must be Maya, Richard said, recognizing her immediately from Naomi's descriptions. And you're the patient my sister is killing herself for. Maya replied, not unkindly but without warmth. Do you know she missed a job interview for you? Do you know she's barely eating because she spends her lunch money on extra food for you when you refuse the hospital meals? Richard stopped his walking exercise, gripping the bars for support. She told me about the interview, but not about the food. My sister doesn't tell people when she's sacrificing for them. Maya said, she just does it. She's been doing it her whole life. Maya's voice grew stronger. She gave up college to take care of our dying mother. She gave up dating, traveling, having her own dreams, to make sure I could have mine. And now she's giving up her health and her future for a stranger who, Maya paused, studying Richard's face, who means more to her than she's willing to admit. I've made terrible mistakes, Richard said quietly. I let her sacrifice for me while hiding who I really am. But I need you to know what she did for me wasn't wasted. She saved my life, not just medically but in every way that matters. Then prove it, Maya said. Don't let her sacrifices be for nothing. If you care about her, really care about her, find a way to honor what she's given up. That evening, Naomi returned to find an envelope on Richard's bedside table with her name written in his careful handwriting. Inside was a check made out to Maya's university for the full amount of her tuition gap, along with a note. "This isn't payment for what you've done. What you've given can't be repaid. This is my attempt to honor your sacrifice by ensuring it achieves what you hoped for. Maya deserves her dream, and you deserve to see her achieve it." Richard below that, in smaller text, "There are no strings attached to this gift. Whether you ever speak to me again or not, Maya's education is secure." When Naomi arrived at the hospital the next day, she found Richard's room empty. Panicked, she rushed to the nurse's station. "Mr. Montgomery was discharged this morning," Sandra Morrison said, her expression softer than usual. "His nephew came to pick him up. Private rehabilitation facility. Did he leave anything else?" Naomi asked. Sandra handed her a second envelope, this one thicker than the first. Inside were several documents. First, a letter of recommendation for the children's hospital position, written on letterhead from Montgomery Construction and signed by Richard as CEO. Second, documentation showing that Maya had been awarded a full merit scholarship for medical school, funded by the newly established Carter Family Education Fund. The accompanying letter was longer. "Naomi, by the time you read this I'll be gone. I couldn't face saying goodbye, knowing how much I've hurt you by hiding the truth. But I needed you to know that everything you've given, your time, your energy, your hope, your belief in me, was the most valuable gift I've ever received. You taught me that healing isn't about returning to who you were, it's about discovering who you can become. You showed me that accepting help isn't weakness, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone else believe in you until you can believe in yourself. The scholarship fund isn't charity, it's recognition. Maya is brilliant and deserves every opportunity, but more than that, she's been raised by someone who understands that caring for others is both a calling and a choice. The medical world needs more doctors like she'll become. I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be. I watched you sacrifice without telling you I could help, and that was selfish and wrong. But I need you to know that what you did, refusing to let me give up on myself, changed everything. I'm donating the majority of my wealth to establish rehabilitation centers that focus not just on physical recovery, but on helping people rebuild their sense of worth. Every person who benefits from these programs will have you to thank, because you showed me what true healing looks like. If you can ever forgive me, I hope we can be friends. Real friends with no secrets and no debts between us. If not, I understand. Either way, you saved my life, and I'll spend the rest of it trying to be worthy of that gift. With eternal gratitude and respect, Richard. 3 months later, Naomi was working her first shift at Children's Hospital when she received a call from Maya. "I got in," Maya said, her voice bright with joy. "Johns Hopkins accepted me into their medical program, and Naomi, I'm going to specialize in rehabilitation medicine. I want to help people the way you helped him." "That's wonderful," Naomi said, feeling tears prick her eyes. "There's more," Maya continued. "The scholarship fund Richard set up. It's not just for me, it's going to help 20 students a year pursue medical careers. He named it after Mom too, the Carter Elena Memorial Scholarship Fund." That weekend, Naomi drove to the rehabilitation center where Richard was completing his recovery. She found him in the physical therapy room, working with a young woman who'd been paralyzed in a diving accident. He was walking with just a cane now, his movements careful but confident. "You can do this," she heard him tell the young woman as she struggled with parallel bars. "It's not about going back to who you were, it's about discovering who you can become. Someone very wise taught me that." When Richard saw Naomi, his face lit up with a mixture of joy and apprehension. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said after introducing her to his physical therapy group. "I wasn't sure I would either," Naomi admitted. "But I wanted to see how you were doing, and to talk." They found a quiet corner of the center's garden. Richard moved slowly but steadily, his recovery remarkable but incomplete. He would always need the cane, would always have days when the pain reminded him of what he'd lost. But he had built a new life around who he was now. "I owe you an apology that goes deeper than keeping my identity secret," Richard began. "I let you believe that caring for me might cost you everything, while knowing I had the power to make sure it cost you nothing. That was cruel, even if it wasn't intentional. It was cruel, Naomi agreed. But I understand why you did it. They talked for 2 hours, about healing and forgiveness, about the strange alchemy that had transformed both their lives. Richard shared his plans for the rehabilitation centers, his work with other patients, his growing relationship with his nephew Daniel, who had become both family and business partner. I have a proposal, Richard said as they prepared to part. Not a job offer, a partnership. I want to create a new model of patient care that combines medical treatment with emotional support. Programs where nurses like you can spend the time needed to really heal people, without worrying about productivity metrics or budget constraints. What would that look like? Naomi asked. Facilities where healing is measured not just in medical outcomes, but in restored hope. Where healthcare workers are supported and valued, not ground down by impossible demands. Where people like that young woman in there have someone who refuses to let them give up on themselves. Naomi considered this, thinking about all the patients she'd seen who needed more than medical care, who needed someone to believe in their capacity to heal. I'm interested, she said, but I have conditions. Name them. No special treatment because of our history. No exceptions to normal hiring practices. If I do this, I do it because I'm qualified, not because of what happened between us. Agreed, Richard said immediately. And the scholarship fund stays separate from any business relationship we might have. Maya earns her success on her own merit. Also agreed. And if we're going to work together, we're going to do it as equals. You have the money and the connections, but I have the expertise and the experience. Real partnership means both voices matter. Richard extended his hand with a smile that held genuine respect. Partners. 2 years later, the Montgomery Carter Healing Centers had opened their 3rd location. Naomi served as director of therapeutic care, implementing programs that treated recovery as a holistic process involving body, mind, and spirit. Maya had graduated summa cum laude and been accepted into Johns Hopkins MDC PhD program, specializing in rehabilitation medicine and psychology. The model they'd developed was being studied by hospitals across the country, patient care that prioritized time and attention alongside medical intervention, with outcomes that proved that healing happened when people felt truly seen and supported. One evening, as Naomi finished her rounds at the original center, she found Richard in the garden, where they'd had their first honest conversation. He was reading to a group of recent spinal injury patients, sharing his own story of recovery and the nurse who'd refused to let him quit. The most important thing I learned, he was telling them, is that healing requires both the willingness to help and the courage to accept help. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones with medical degrees, they're the ones who see who we can become when we can't see it ourselves. After the group dispersed, Richard and Naomi sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Do you ever regret it? Richard asked. Everything you gave up to help a difficult stranger. Naomi considered this, thinking about the path that had brought them here. I regret that you felt you couldn't trust me with the truth earlier. I regret the pain we both went through because of that. But the sacrifices, no. They led to something bigger than either of us could have imagined. She gestured toward the center, where lights were coming on in patient rooms and therapy spaces. How many people have been helped because I refused to let you give up? How many nurses have better working conditions? How many students have educational opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise? And how many patients have been truly seen and cared for because you showed me what that looks like? Richard added. Maya arrived as the sun was setting, having driven down from Baltimore for her monthly visit. At 26, she was completing her residency and already making contributions to rehabilitation research. Her thesis on the psychological aspects of recovery was being published in a major medical journal. How's our foundation doing? Maya asked, settling beside them on the garden bench. Our latest scholarship recipient just started medical school at Duke, Richard reported. And the new nurses education program graduated 15 students this month. All because one stubborn nurse refused to let one difficult patient give up on himself, Maya said with a smile. All because sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is refuse to leave someone alone in their darkest moment, Naomi replied. As the three of them sat together, surrounded by the evidence of how far they'd all come, Naomi reflected on the night that had started it all. The stranger in room 214 had been angry, difficult, and seemingly impossible to reach. But underneath all that pain had been someone worth fighting for, someone who just needed to remember that giving up wasn't the only option. Richard had been right in one of his early letters. Healing wasn't about returning to who you were before. It was about discovering who you could become, with the help of people who refused to let you face that discovery alone. The work continued, spreading from center to center, patient to patient, moment of refusal to give up to moment of refusal to give up. And in that spreading, the simple truth that had started it all was proven again and again, that the most practical thing in the world was often the most impractical, choosing to believe in someone's capacity to heal, even when they couldn't believe it themselves. When Naomi finally drove home that night, she thought about the notebook entry she'd written after her first encounter with Richard. Met a patient today who's lost everything. He's angry and difficult and mean to everyone who tries to help. But underneath all that anger, he's terrified. She'd been right about the fear. What she hadn't anticipated was that sometimes helping someone face their terror was worth any sacrifice. And sometimes, the stranger you refuse to abandon becomes the catalyst for changing not just your own life, but the lives of countless others who needed someone to believe in their capacity to heal. The last entry in her journal, written that very evening, read, "Some people are put in your path not to receive your help, but to teach you what's possible when you refuse to give up on the human capacity for transformation. Today I'm grateful for every sacrifice that led to this moment, and for the stubborn hope that sometimes, against all odds, broken people can help each other become whole."
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.